Welcome to the Enchanted Earth podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own. So welcome. Today we have Faith Adiele with us. Faith writes and speaks about race, culture, and travel. She's author of Meeting Faith, a memoir about ordaining as Thailand's first Black Buddhist nun that won the Penn Open Book Award and routinely appears on travel listicles. Her media credits include Sleep Stories, a Calm app, 2 episodes of A World of Calm through HBO Max, and the documentary My Journey Home on PBS about finding her family in Nigeria. Founder of the nation's first writing workshop for travelers of color, she teaches at California College of the Arts and leads writing workshops around the world. Follow her at adiele.com and at Meeting Faith. So welcome, Faith. So nice to have you here today.
It's so great to be here and be able to continue these conversations we've been having. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe it's been over 2 years since
Wow.
we talked about a profound story of nature for my book, The Enchanted Earth. And I just want to thank you so much for your wonderful endorsement of the book. I just popped it up here. You're talking about an approach that implements what climate activists are finally beginning to understand, that any solution requires changing the narrative around what we tell ourselves about the planet and our relationship to it. Oh, those words are so moving to me. That is really my mission here with this podcast as well as the book. And I know so many of us with our work. So I could just love to open this with something you said to me when we first got on a couple of years ago. You know, I said, "Oh, can you tell me a story about nature?" And you said, "I don't like nature."
That sounds like me.
And I was so blown away. I mean, we were cracking up because it's like, you were like, "I have no idea where I accepted your invitation to, do an interview." And I'm like, "Well, I don't either. So let's see where this goes." But you certainly do. We all do, right? Even though we may have lived in urban environments, you didn't start out in an urban environment.
No.
And of course, yeah, you had some amazing, moving stories to share about nature. But just tell me a little bit about why you said that. Just kind of curious.
Well, it's kind of big. I think it's kind of become my brand. And I think partly because I was raised in a rural setting in the Pacific Northwest with my Nordic immigrant family. And I mean, we did do outdoor things. We lived on a farm where we went camping and stuff like that. But I think for me, the dream was always to get to the city. And I think if you're a bookworm, if you're a nerd, if you someone, I knew my father was from Nigeria, so I also had a very kind of international upbringing. We were much more globally minded than the other people around us. And then I think also traditionally in the US, for Black people, the cities have been seen as the sites of liberation, And so it was kind of like, I want to get to the city and I want to remake myself as a city girl. And then I think once I lost my grandparents, also then I associated, that with them. And that, so I think there was also some grief and some loss around my, my rural upbringing. And so those were things, those things of childhood that one puts away. And I remade myself as a smart city girl who had no use for nature. Plus, it just shocks people so much. And what part it was also then when I moved to California, and I moved there for the culture, but everyone would be like, let's get together to take a walk, as if, that were the social thing. And I was like, wait, what? We're just going to like walk together? Like, are we walking to something cool? And so I was also kind of shocked and appalled that this is what people were like providing for me in terms of social.
Oh, wow. Wow. So funny. So, yes, you have a very unique background, Nigerian and yeah, Nordic. So, yeah, that sense of straddling two different continents. Touch her.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing, in my life journey, much of my writing has been about going and finding those ancestral villages, going to Nigeria and finding my father and my siblings, but also my ancestral village, and going to Finland and Sweden and finding where our, elders had immigrated from and connecting. And so ironically, I find myself returning to the village over and over again against my will, you know, because again, people don't live in cities. I mean, it's only recently that the Finnish population has moved into the cities, but they're very much, a rural agrarian society. And every summer, everybody rushes back to their cabins. Same thing in Nigeria. You never say you're from a city. When people say, "Where are you from?" you tell your family's ancestral village, even if you've never been there. And so, ironically, I found that I come from these cultures that very much identify with nature and the village and the beginning of origin. And it took me having to travel around the world to actually find out that, oh, I'm a village girl. I'm a nature girl after all.
Oh, wonderful. And as we speak now, you're in Italy in an
Yes.
art residency.
Yes.
And yes, of course, I jest that I want to be you when I grow up because you travel the world and write about your travels. And like that is like a dream for so many of us.
Yes. Yes, I feel very, very lucky.
So I don't want to gloss over the fact that in your bio, you talk about being Thailand's first Black Buddhist nun.
No, I'm always just kind of stumbling into things, like, not planning them, not reading the small print, just kind of like going. Or if someone tells me I shouldn't, then I'm like, oh, I must go. So that was the thing too. When I proposed ordaining as a nun, everyone's like, no. All the Thai people would be like, broken heart, broken home. They would act as though the only reason a woman would ordain is because she had failed at normal life. Whereas it's quite an honor to become a monk. So that did kind of, make me determined that I must then do this because there's clearly something going on there. What is the narrative, right? And we know that the narrative is so important. So if people have a particular narrative that they're saying, if they're resisting a narrative, then I'd have to get in there and kind of nuance that narrative and push back against that narrative. I wasn't thinking about being the first. I was just thinking about the fact that they were saying I couldn't do it. So I wanted to do it. It wasn't until later, um, when my advisor arranged for me to be ordained at the Royal Temple of the North, the first ceremony ever held for a woman. I was like, oh, there's some significance to what I'm doing here. I didn't even really think about the Blackness until later, and talking about it to other people, saying, like, oh, there there hadn't been anyone else before. I knew I was the first one in the temple. And that just, all of that just raised the stakes to make me to ensure that I did a good job of it, because I knew I had to represent. But for some reason, they were going to allow me to do it, even though I didn't know what I was doing. And it ended up being wonderful. And so many of those transformative experiences can be when we're, challenging ourselves. And in this case, nature had a great deal to do with the spiritual and personal transformation that happened for me while living in the temple.
Oh, wow. Do you have anything to share around that?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there were just so many things about this place. It's an unusual temple that's off the beaten path. And I met the head nun uh, at a ceremony in town, and she was talking about the place, and it sounded really magical. And I was doing research, interviewing Thai women why they had chosen to ordain, because people, had such this weird narrative about it and just assumed that they had failed at society and they didn't have good conditions. The way, monks are treated very, very well, but nuns didn't. But she was describing this temple that sounded really amazing, that there was equity for women there. So I wanted to visit it. And so she kind of told me where it was. And I think that was the first test to see if I could find it, because it was like, there weren't signs. So, I had to like ride a bus, into the countryside and then just like ask where to get off. And then, there were people working it. There were farmers working in rice fields, so I'd be like, am I going the right way? So of course everybody stops working and they're standing with their mouth hanging open looking at me. And then they're like, they're nuns that away. So I'm like tromping through the rice fields, So it's this wonderful thing, right? So I finally get to this place where it's like this big, like a mountain. There's two rock formations and there's like a waterfall pouring down and there's like sun on one side and all these monks are working actively in the sun and they're being followed by these dogs. And then on this shadowy side, it's like, shady and there are all these nuns in white kind of just floating along and they're like giant butterflies. And I'm just like, what? Like, is this real? And I'm just standing there and the head nun is like standing on the path. Because of course, I'm sure she'd like been hearing for like, minutes that there's a foreigner coming, So she was standing there and she's like, oh, you made it. And the minute I saw it, I was like, I want to ordain. Like prior to that, people were saying, if you're going to interview women, the failure of Western anthropology is that we go and we dabble and we come back with a narrative that fits our purposes, but we've not risked anything. And so people kept saying that if you're going to want to try to write about someone's experience, you're going to have to, walk in their shoes, but you're going to also have to have something at stake. And so I'd been thinking about that politically, but I wasn't really interested in living a spiritual life or living in the temple, but I understood it politically and ethically. And then when I saw the place, a little mouth inside my heart opened and I wanted it for myself. And I was just like, I must ordain here. And so the setting did that. And as she explained how complicated a place it was, I was not listening. I was just looking at the nature and making a decision with my heart that had I been paying attention, I would not have had the guts to do it. So it was until after our date and I arrived, and then she's like, remember what I told you? And I was like, what? So, and then I was shocked to find out what the rules were. So thank goodness that, on some level, the part that needed to make the decision, which was not the intellectual part, responded.
Wow. So that beautiful landscape in front of you, it brought you into your heart center where you needed to be to make this decision and not in the head.
Yeah.
It was not a mental, yeah. And then like you said, it can't be when we're truly in a place of growth and being open to transformation and the experience, a full experience.
Yes, exactly. That's just how it proceeded. It was very, life was very much determined by the natural rhythms of where we were living, and we had to get up very early, sweep the leaves, keep our area perfect, And she was like, don't worry about it. Every day the leaves will fall and every day our job is to sweep them, and then, and they just be, everything was a form of meditation. So you're just so aware of the changing light and the temperature and the ambient noise and, just all of that around you, getting what you need to do done during the daylight, and so just, the stream. I mean, she would use things like that as well, like the whole idea of consciousness and what you need to pay attention to. She would say, the stream is always there, but you're only aware of it when your consciousness is, attached to your ear, right? It doesn't stop. And I'd be like, oh, that's right. So just all of these ways of kind of learning how to get in touch with yourself and using your own body as kind of a lab for understanding the way the world works. It's just so easy to do it there. And it was, so kind of clear and wonderful. But there were also then, real dangers. There were the farmers would go through the temple and they would farm in the back. And then occasionally they would do slash and burn. And so the fires would get out of control and we'd have to go out and fight fires, and then the head nun would be like, well, let this be a lesson about, like human desire. I'm like, I'm actually really anxious about the fire. but they were just so kind of accepting of because Buddhism is all about kind of cycles and that things are always changing and that, a lot of anxiety comes from grasping and trying to stop that change. But in nature, you see that things are always changing. And so just kind of really taking full advantage of what we could learn from the place where we were. So it was very instructive and it was just, so beautiful too. Just, it just helped kind of calm me and kind of get me into the space of trying to do this work because I had never meditated before. So everything was new to me.
Wow, Faith. Wow. I Part of me craves that experience,
Mhm.
craves that space to
Yeah.
just be. And I think it's a reminder to us that we have to create more of that space in our modern lives. I mean,
Right.
even you as a modern woman going to this kind of like ancient or, older temple to become a nun, having that time away, but knowing, you have to take that you've learned back into the world.
Right. Yeah. That's the key thing.
Wow.
That's
Are there certain lessons that you learned there that you're constantly trying to remind yourself of?
that's such a good question too, because everybody seems to think that once you've reached like a certain level, and we're not going to say enlightenment, but of awareness, right, that then you're set. And of course, that that's not the case, right? We're constantly having to remind ourselves of what we know and constantly trying to remind ourselves of like healthy best practices and then I think also just being in our society, which is so whatever, right? It's so distracted, split focus, multitasking, accomplishment focused, everything, around capitalism, perfectionism, individualists, like all of the things are it's completely antithetical to lessons of mindfulness. And so I'm continually forgetting what I learned and being completely freaked out and on somebody else's agenda. And then I'll be like, oh, wait, I have a really simple solution, which is like breathe and be mindful for like 5 or 10 minutes. I've got it right here, you know. I don't necessarily need a pill or to buy something or to self medicate in all the various ways that I do sugar, caffeine, Netflix, all of that. I do actually know the answer, but I continually have to remind myself. And so it's not like you reach something. You have to, the struggle to be human and maintain your humanity is like, ever present, right? It's constant. It's constant.
And I think it is, I think, hopeful for all of us to remember that there's no such thing as enlightenment or perfection. It is, like you said, it's not like you attain some level and then you're free. We're
Right.
living in these human bodies, and as long as we're here, we're in a constant space of being reminded that, hey, be present, be mindful in the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Is there any particular place that you find solace in nature? Any particular type of environment or location?
Mhm. I like both mountains and water. I've noticed that like purely kind of flat landscapes make me a bit anxious. But I was just in Chefchaouen, which is kind of an Instagram invention, this blue city in Morocco. Everybody rushes there. It's so photographed, and essentially there's not much going on, but it's blue. And then it's like surrounded in mountains. And I was feeling uneasy while I was there, and I was like, I love the drive there. We like took the train to Tangier, which is beautiful. It's right in the Strait of Gibraltar. There's water. And then we went to another town, Tetuan, which is mountains and water. And then we went inland away from the water to this, kind of mountainous area. And initially I was like, oh, mountains, I'm happy. But then, We just got there to this town that seemed fabricated. And I just started to feel somehow, and I was like, oh, I really want to go back. So I ended up leaving and going back to Tangier, which is just have these incredible views, of Europe, which is interesting. But almost wherever you go, in these like narrow twisting streets and hills, you could see a glimpse of water. And then I realized that water is key for me to see too. It's not just the mountains, but I kind of like them both, I think. Oh, so
Yeah. I mean, it's the way you just described the feeling of those two places. I could feel it. Like one is very connected and one was very surface.
mhm, mhm,
That, fabricated village or town was lacking that real spirit of place
mhm, mhm.
that you found at those other locations.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that in Thailand, where you studied and stayed, that there was the mountains and that water.
Yeah. Yeah. The Swordfish River in between. Yeah. And I love those landscapes. I mean, rice paddies, terrace rice paddies and stuff like that. I'm always like, that seems incredible. Like also the intensity of the colors involved in that, I think are really beautiful as well. So yeah.
So, so in your ancestral homes, were there mountains and water?
Um, well, so I grew up in Eastern Washington, which is ugly. It's an ugly landscape. And you have to cross over the mountains to get there, which is why the landscape is so different from Seattle. You have these gorgeous mountain ranges that trap that trap the rain, and then you have these kind of dry hills that very much look like a western. And actually, I just had two new chapbooks that come out, and they're very much involved. I talk a lot about kind of the Western mythology that we were involved in because it actually looks like a backdrop for a spaghetti Western. It's these scrub hills and, all of that kind of stuff. And it was so that to me, hot, dry, not appealing at all. So I was actually kind of disconnected from that. But, we kind of created this little oasis where we lived. And then when we went camping and all fishing and hiking in the summer, we would either go to lakes or we would go to the coast because the rest of our family were like in Portland and Seattle, because that's where all the Scandinavian and Nordic communities are. We were the only ones who had gone inland. So so I'm used to driving past mountains or driving to bodies of water. Then when I got to my ancestral village in Nigeria, it is in southern Nigeria, which is subtropical. So really kind of thick vegetation, kind of probably what would have been called jungle back when we used those terms. And I'd say the most significant thing is this huge, huge tree in the center of our village that was stunning in size. I mean, the roots were like the height of a man, and then it just like spread out over, it was like kind of in this intersection of pathways, and it would just like, kind of lean all over. When I saw it, I immediately had this huge, because, it was a roots journey. I was 26 years old when I went to Nigeria and met my father and siblings for the first time. And then seeing this tree, which I was like, oh, okay, thanks for the symbol, universe, because of very, very dramatic symbol. And then my sister ended up telling me this crazy story that during the Nigerian Civil War, when the Nigerian troops, the Federalist troops came, it took them a long time to get as far south and east as our village. But when they got there, they saw the tree and it was so kind of in your face that they were like, oh, to conquer this village, we're going to have to cut it down. And so wherever they struck the tree, blood ran out. And they were so freaked out that they left. And so our village never fell during the war. So that's the mythology of the place. And so I was like, oh, I love this tree. So that was a very kind of dramatic moment for me of kind of recognition and feeling that this indeed was my place. And then in my my mother's ancestral village in Finland, it's flat. It's a little too flat for me. It's like beautifully green lakes. And it's yeah, that's all it is. It's like forest, it's like birch forests, hay, green fields, lakes everywhere, but it's a little monotonous. Like when I'm riding the train, I'm like, oh, it's beautiful. And then I'm just like, oh my God, like nothing. There's nothing, So it's not like Norway with fjords and mountains or something like that. Finland is really just kind of flat, but it's really clean. And yeah, it's a very kind of clean, simple life. Everybody has a cabin that they, next to water. It's like very important to, have your sauna and then, jump in the lake or fish and scavenge for berries and all of that kind of stuff. So there were things from my grandparent farm that I recognized, like, oh, we must spend all this time growing berries and put the in the freezer. Otherwise, we'll panic that we don't have enough berries in the freezer. That's what everyone's concerned with, and we've got to catch salmon and then smoke it and like have that. So there were things from my childhood that I recognized as soon as I got to Finland. And I think that there are reasons why Nordic immigrants settled in certain places in America because they recognized the landscapes. And so not where we were, but like if you go to Seattle and Portland and Duluth, then, if you go to these certain areas, it looks very familiar. And so that's why they were drawn there, because they could live the kind of life that they were used to that revolves around timber and fishing and that sort of thing.
Now, just getting back to that ancestral tree in Nigeria,
Mm.
you shared something pretty devastating with me about that tree.
Yeah. Most recently when I was there, kind of superstition around, the people in the village feeling that they, been unlucky. And so feeling that maybe bad things were happening around that tree. People were hanging out there. And so I guess the memory of what it had done to protect the village during the war has been lost and been replaced with another narrative around, that being a gathering spot for people to, make bad plans or, do black magic or whatever it is that they thought was going on. And so, yeah, there does seem to be, I was told there was an attack on the tree. I didn't go because I couldn't bear to see it. So, yeah.
Trees have such a strong connection with us, such a soul connection.
Yeah.
It just is so unbelievable when people just take them down.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think that, I'm sure traditional societies were aware of kind of the network of communication that trees have and that fungi have as well. And then I'm sure that got lost in the Industrial Revolution. So we've not been aware of it, or, as capitalism sees, land as commodity and people as commodity, then of course it's, kind of not aware of that. And it's only recently now that science is confirming that in fact trees communicate and, take care of each other and do all of this sort of stuff. So now we're like recovering that ancestral memory, but it's couched as scientific fact now. And again, I'm not sure if that's going to have any impact on policy making, but we are in fact aware now of kind of how how the natural world interacts with us a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah. What do you see is next for us as humanity when it comes to planet Earth?
Oh my God.
It's a big question.
I know. I'm not a big thinker in that way. I'm not. And I'm also a pessimist. So
Yeah, it's very easy to be pessimistic about our future. And I like to think that we do have to switch the narrative. We do have to step away from that doom and gloom. I think
Mhm.
it's too heavy. I think there's so much heaviness
Right.
in our current world that we need to really foster this joy of living and bring that energy back. I'm just curious, are people around the world, because you are traveling all over the world, are you feeling that at all from any sectors or no? Is it very heavy about our future?
I'd say Americans tend to be heavier, and I think it's because we're a younger society, and so we tend to be very kind of we're not aware of history very much. And so we seem to think that everything is for the first time, you know? And so it's like, you know, either we fix it right now or, we're just very unaware of things, which is, why we're like headed back to the 30s right now. But whereas I think other societies that have been around longer know things come in cycles. And that's both good and bad. I mean, if scientists say that the planet, is heating up at a level that is unsustainable, it's probably not good to say like, oh, it'll work out. It always does, In that sense, I feel like people should take things a little more seriously and not things always work out, because we do have technologies that are more extreme in the past. But yeah, I find that people aren't quite as kind of dramatic about stuff because I think they're more aware of history. And the arguments that we have about politics, like in Nigeria, they're performative. Like everybody loves to like complain about the death of society and, and how terrible politics are. And every single time I go home, my brother is like, this is the worst Nigeria has been. And I'm like, but didn't you say that? But this time it's really, and there's great joy in that too. I think people just have, I mean, most societies, they mix like humor and pathos, you know, and I mean, there's this complexity of emotions, you can't be joyful unless you know sadness as well, and it's not just kind of one thing or the other. And you don't have to always be happy or take a pill if you're not happy. There's just like more kind of complexity of stuff, and being able to talk about it, having, these hard conversations. And so I feel like there's more kind of balance, and then there are people who are just, concerned with survival, and they are seeing, their livelihood, they are seeing their lands being taken or being degraded, sea change, oil pollution, there are those things. But those people are still going to have great senses of humor and be able to be very hospitable when you show up. They're still going to like put some things together and like serve you and like want to talk to you about where you came from or what's going on and stuff like that. So people are still, humans be humaning all the time, right? Regardless of, kind of what else is going on. So, yeah.
Thank you for that perspective. That that's really, yeah, it's really heartening to hear. Yeah, we've been in tough times before, and it'll work out somehow. Is in closing, are there anything else you would like to share?
When traveling, I'm still always really thinking about connections with humans, or cats. Those are the things I pay attention to, or like kids, cats, and then adults. When I move through the world, that's what I'm like looking at and connecting with.
And that's the natural world.
That is the natural world. But I'm always drawn, like when I want to, like when I was asking people in Morocco, I was like, where should I go? And everyone's like, well, what do you need? And I was like, well, it's got to be beautiful. I'm always kind of seeking beauty, particularly when I travel. I guess maybe I don't expect that in my ordinary life. I want my ordinary life, I kind of want cultural activities, but then outside of that, then I guess I always am looking for some sort of serenity, which is why then people can't understand why I say that I don't like nature. Cause I was like, well, but I'd want to be on a balcony looking at the beautiful stuff, but I mean, I'm always looking for opportunities to be proven wrong and shaken up. And so I think nature really affords that, because it always shows you that you're small and insignificant when you're in nature. Just like going into a situation with a preconceived notion of who these people are going to be and then being surprised, which is what I love about travel. But nature affords that as well. That's like, I don't really matter, and it's a mystery, and I've got to figure out what's going on. And so there's that kind of wonderful reminder all the time whenever you're interacting with the natural world, I guess. So it's that opportunity to keep learning.
Wonderful. Yes. And curiosity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Faith, thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your beautiful stories. I'm always inspired when we chat.
Well, thank you.
To all of you, please like, share, comment. I would love to hear your thoughts about our conversation today. Have a wonderful day.
A part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Comment below, share, and most of all, please hit the subscribe button so that you'll hear when we publish another inspiring episode. You can visit us at luminous-spaces.com for more information on our online courses, retreats, and offerings. Thank you and have a magical day.